Sometimes the smallest gestures leave the deepest marks. It was supposed to be just another cold afternoon in a grocery store parking lot. A tired man waiting for his son, and a stranger asking to charge her phone. No names, no promises, just a quiet moment shared between two people who had nothing, and yet gave something profound. 3 days later, a private jet appeared in the sky. What happened in between, and what came after, is a story about grief, kindness, and the unexpected ways life gives us a second chance. And once you hear it, I promise, you won't forget it. If you're someone who believes in the quiet power of human connection and in stories that heal more than they hurt, you're in the right place. Feel free to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt, real-life inspired stories like this one. And now, let's begin. A struggling single dad. Let a woman charge her phone. 3 days later, she sent a jet for him. The wind scraped through the rusted seams of the old pickup truck like an unwanted guest. Tom Carter tightened his coat around his shoulders and leaned forward, rubbing his calloused hands together for warmth. Outside, the sky was the color of wet concrete, and snow flurries fell lazily through the late afternoon air. The heater had given out 2 winters ago, and no amount of cursing or coaxing had brought it back to life. The dashboard clock blinked 4:13 p.m., its digits dim from a weak battery. Tom had parked in his usual spot behind the Dollar Saver grocery, angled just enough to catch the last of the sun. Though today there wasn't any sun to catch. His son, Eli, would be out of school in about 15 minutes. That meant 15 minutes of silence, of stillness, of breath that fogged the cracked windshield. He reached into a crumpled paper bag beside him and pulled out a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich. No jelly. He'd used the last spoonful on Eli's lunch that morning. He chewed slowly, his jaw tight. The bread was stale, but it filled the space in his stomach, and that was enough for now. Across the lot, a mother loaded groceries into the back of a shiny SUV while her kids giggled in the back seat. Tom looked away, not out of envy, but habit. He'd trained himself not to stare at the lives that ran smoother than his. There was a time not so long ago when he and Emily, his late wife, would have been that family. She would have worn that same big winter scarf that always trailed in the wind, would have laughed as Eli knocked over a bag of apples, and Tom would have picked them up one by one just to hear her say he was the calm in their chaos. But that was before the icy back road, before the screech of tires, before the long nights in a hospital waiting room and a doctor who couldn't meet his eyes. A gust of wind rattled the truck, pulling Tom back to the present. He finished the sandwich, wiped his hands on his jeans, and rested his head on the steering wheel for a moment. Just a moment. The fatigue was bone deep these days, not just from work, but from the ache of keeping it all together. For Eli, for himself. His phone buzzed weakly in the cup holder. 17% battery. A reminder that time moved forward whether he liked it or not. Then he heard it, a soft tap on the window. He looked up, startled. A woman stood beside the truck, bundled in a long coat, her hair soaked from the snow, holding a phone in her hand like a lifeline. Her face was flushed from the cold, and when she smiled apologetically, it was tight and uncertain. "Sorry to bother you," she said through the half-open window. "Would you mind if I just charged my phone? I'm kind of stuck." Tom blinked, then glanced at the old charger dangling from the dashboard. "Yeah," he said, clearing his throat. "Sure, hop in. It's not warm, but it's dry." She hesitated for half a beat before opening the door and slipping inside, her coat shedding flakes of snow onto the torn seat. She plugged in her phone and exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," she said quietly. Tom nodded. "No problem." They sat in silence. The only sound was the occasional ping of melting snow on the roof and the hum of her phone charging. He glanced at her, noticed the expensive cut of her coat, the well-manicured nails. She didn't look. like someone who belonged in a place like this. But then, he thought, neither did he, not anymore. "I'm Tom," he offered after a moment. She looked over and smiled again. "Anna." They shook hands lightly, almost formally, like strangers, on a park bench sharing a moment in the rain. "Car trouble?" he asked. "No," she said. "Just needed a place to stop. My phone died. No one to call, really. Just felt safer here than walking aimlessly." He nodded. He understood that feeling more than she could know. "I get it," he said. "Sometimes you just need a place to breathe." They didn't talk much after that. Anna stared at her phone, scrolling without focus. Tom kept his eyes on the falling snow. Yet something about the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was companionable, like two people sharing a quiet shelter from a storm, literal and otherwise. 15 minutes passed, her phone buzzed back to life, and she sighed, slipping it into her coat pocket. "Thank you again," she said, opening the door and stepping out into the fading light. "Most people wouldn't have bothered," Tom shrugged. "Most people underestimate the power of a working charger." She laughed at that, and for a moment the heaviness in her eyes lifted. "I hope things get better for you, Tom," she said, softly, before closing the door and walking away into the snow. He watched her go, the crunch of her boots disappearing into the sound of wind and passing cars. A minute later, Eli appeared across the parking lot, his backpack bouncing, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Dad!" he shouted, running toward the truck. Tom opened the door, scooped him up with a grunt, and held him for a second longer than usual. "Hey, buddy. Good day." Eli nodded vigorously. "Miss Baker let me draw a robot with 5 arms." Tom chuckled, brushing snow off his son's coat. "That sounds like one talented robot." As they drove off, the heater still broken, the sky darkening and dinner uncertain, Tom glanced at the passenger seat. Anna's presence had left no trace, no scent, no scarf, no forgotten phone. And yet, the truck felt different, lighter. He couldn't explain it, but something had shifted, and though he didn't know it yet, the storm had already begun to pass. The next morning broke grey and indifferent. Tom stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the single cereal bowl Eli had used for breakfast. The faucet groaned and sputtered before releasing a weak stream of cold water. The heat had been cut off last week, and the trailer groaned in the wind like an old man with aching bones. Outside, sleet pelted the thin windows, turning the world into a blur of ice and slush. Eli sat cross-legged on the worn rug, colouring in a picture of a dragon with bright orange crayons. He hummed quietly, as if the world wasn't closing in. Around them, one unpaid bill at a time. Tom dried the bowl with a shirt sleeve and glanced at the wall clock, 7:41 a.m. If they left now, they might just make it to school before the worst of the weather set in. He crouched beside Eli. "All right, chap. Let's get your boots on. Do I have to wear the ones that squeak?" "They all squeak." Eli sighed, exaggerated and theatrical, then grinned. Tom helped him into the oversized boots and pulled a too small knit hat over his son's ears. It would have to do for one more winter. They didn't have the luxury of new things, only the comfort of things that still worked. The drive to the elementary school was quiet. The truck's defroster had given up years ago, so Tom scraped the inside of the windshield with an old CD case at stoplights. Eli sang softly to himself in the passenger seat, still clutching his dragon drawing. As they pulled into the school drop-off lane, Eli turned serious. "You'll pick me up, right?" Tom smiled. "Always." He watched as his son trudged toward the entrance, backpack bouncing, boots squeaking with every step. Tom exhaled slowly. There was no work lined up for the day, no busted sink, no hay deliveries, no fences needing repair. He could either go home and stare at the ceiling or not. He didn't decide consciously. His hands just drove. 15 minutes later, he found himself back at the Dollar Saver parking lot, parked in the same spot behind the building. Snow had crusted into grey slush at the curbs, his breath fogged in the cab. He leaned back and closed. His eyes. It wasn't sleep he wanted, just stillness. Then something caught his attention in the side mirror. A figure moving quickly across the lot, arms wrapped tightly around themselves, head down against the wind. A woman, the same woman. Tom sat up straighter, squinting. It was her, the one from the day before. Anna. Her coat was soaked again, darker at the shoulders and sleeves. She wasn't walking this time, she was limping. Something was off. Tom reached for the door handle. He stepped out into the cold. "Hey!" he called. She looked up, startled, then froze for a beat before recognizing him. "Oh," she said, her expression softening with relief. "It's you. You okay?" I think my car died." Her voice trembled, but not from the cold. "Alone. I was trying to make it back into town, but I guess I didn't plan this part very well." Tom nodded toward the truck. "Get in. We'll figure it out." She hesitated again, then climbed in without a word. Tom slid behind the wheel, turned the key. The truck shuddered to life with a reluctant growl. They sat in silence for a few moments, the engine ticking steadily beneath them. Anna stared out. The windshield. Her fingers fiddled with the edge of her sleeve. "Where were you trying to go?" Tom asked gently. She swallowed. "Nowhere, really. Just away." Tom nodded. Not because he understood where exactly, but because he understood the why. "I've done that drive," he said quietly. "Nowhere is farther than people think." She gave a soft laugh, dry but real. "Thanks for yesterday," she said. "You didn't have to let me in." "I didn't have much, but I had a charger," he said, a half smile on his face. Seemed like the neighborly thing. She looked at him, really looked at him this time, not with suspicion, not with gratitude, but with a curiosity, recognition, like she was trying to place where she'd seen someone like him before, but couldn't, because she hadn't. Tom reached over and opened the glove box, pulling out a faded thermos. He unscrewed the lid and handed it to her. "It's just coffee, and not the good kind." She took it anyway. The warmth alone made her eyes flutter shut for a second. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "I didn't mean to scare you yesterday. I just didn't know where else to go." "You didn't scare me," Tom said. "People don't scare me. What scares me is when we stop looking out for each other." Anna studied him for a long moment. Her fingers gripped the thermos. Her eyes glistened just slightly at the edges. "You live around here?" Tom gestured vaguely. "Couple miles down the highway, trailer behind the old lumber yard. Just you and your son?" "Just us," he nodded. "He's the reason I keep the wheels turning." The words came out simple, but they hung in the air like something sacred. Anna didn't say anything after that. She just sipped the bad coffee, held it like it was something precious. The silence between them settled again, not heavy, not awkward. Just present. When she finally moved to open the door, she paused. "I don't know what you think I am," she said, voice low, "but you treated me like a person, not a problem, not a puzzle." Tom looked at her, confused. "What else would you be?" She didn't answer that, just offered a tired smile, then stepped out into the snow. Tom watched her go again. Same boots, same coat, same hurried walk, but this time she turned back, just once, and met his eyes. And though the distance between them hadn't closed, something in her gaze had. It was a look that stayed with him long after she disappeared down the block. A look that told him this wasn't over, even if he didn't know her name was about to change everything. Tom always believed in the quietness of things, not silence, not the kind that rang too loud in your ears, but the kind of quiet that settled into you, like the way snow dulled the world, or how the air felt heavy just before Eli drifted off to sleep, his breath even and small beside him. That kind of quiet stayed with Tom all weekend. Saturday came and went like a fading radio station, full of small chores and empty hours. He patched a screen door for Mrs. Langston down the road and split some firewood someone had promised to pay him for, though they never did. He didn't mind. It gave him something to do, something to keep his hands busy while his mind tried not to go back to her. But it did, of course. Over and over, Anna, the woman in the rain, the woman with the tired eyes and the expensive coat she didn't seem to care about. The woman who had looked at him like he was more than just a guy with dirt under his nails and bills on his back. Tom didn't even know her last name, but something about her had stuck, and for a man who'd spent the last few years learning not to hold on to things, that was saying something. Sunday morning came grey and wet again. Eli crawled into bed beside him, chilly fingers and tangled hair. "Dad," he whispered, "can we make pancakes?" Tom smiled into the pillow. "We don't have pancake mix, buddy, but we have eggs. And you said flour's just crushed up bread, right? That's not exactly how it works." Tom ruffled his hair and sat up. "How about grilled cheese and cartoons?" Eli grinned. "Deal." They ate together on the couch, plates balanced, on their knees watching old reruns of Rescue Rangers. Eli laughed loud, carefree. Tom watched him more than the screen, amazed at how children could still find light when adults only saw cracks. Midway through the second episode, Tom's phone buzzed on the counter. A reminder popped up: "Charge phone, get gas, smile." He'd set that reminder months ago. It was silly, but sometimes it helped. He pocketed the phone and glanced toward the window. Rain again. The kind of cold drizzle that seeped into bones. And memory. Anna had walked away in rain like that, and she hadn't come back. He told himself it was nothing. A stranger in a parking lot. A weird, fleeting moment. These things happened all the time, didn't they? But even now her words came back to him. "You treated me like a person, not a problem." He didn't know what she meant then. Not really. But it stuck. By Monday morning, Tom had stopped expecting anything else. Life was back to normal. The hard kind of normal. The kind where you count quarters before filling up your gas tank and pray no one notices the holes in your kids' backpack. He dropped Eli at school just before the bell rang, promising again that he'd be there right at 3 to pick him up. Then he drove back to the parking lot behind the Dollar Saver. Not because he thought she'd be there, just because it felt like the right place to sit, the same spot, the same slope in the pavement, same charger cable looped neatly on the dash. He stared out the windshield, one hand on the steering wheel, the other tapping against his knee. And then it hit him. There was something different in the passenger seat. He turned slowly. Nestled between the seat and the console was a small, folded envelope. He didn't remember seeing it before. But the handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, neat and slanted, with one word written in blue ink. Tom. His heart thudded once, low and deep as he reached for it. Inside was a short note, no signature. "I don't know why I stopped. I don't know why I stayed. But thank you for giving me a moment to just be a human being again. I haven't been. That in a long, long time." That was it. No number, no name. No clue how it had ended up there, whether she'd come back and tucked it into the seat while he wasn't looking, or if she'd left it during that brief second he'd stepped out to stretch his legs on Friday. But she had been here, and she'd thought about him afterward. Tom sat back slowly, the paper trembling slightly in his fingers. The words weren't romantic, they weren't dramatic, but they were real, and somehow that mattered more. That afternoon, while waiting in the pickup line at school, Tom watched Eli run toward the truck with a dragon drawing clutched in one hand and a wide grin on his face. "Dad, guess what?" he said, breathless as he climbed in. "We're making a time capsule for our future selves. We have to put something special in it." Tom nodded, his fingers still resting on the folded note in his jacket pocket. He looked at his son, his bright eyes, his crooked smile, and he smiled back. "I think I've got something we can use." 3 days. That's how long it had been since Tom found the letter. 3 days of wondering if he'd dreamed it all. Anna, the rain, the note folded like something sacred between the truck seats. He'd tucked it away in the inside pocket of his flannel shirt, and every so often he'd reach in just to feel the soft crease of the paper. Proof that it had happened, that she had happened. He hadn't told Eli about it. Not really. He just smiled more, laughed when he could. Cooked grilled cheese with real butter instead of spray-on oil, and let Eli keep the TV on a little longer before bed. Something had shifted in him, a small, quiet spark. Not quite hope, but the cousin of it. Wednesday morning dawned clear and cold. The rain had passed, leaving behind thin frost on the windows and silence in the yard. Tom dressed Eli in double, socks and the sweater with the reindeer that he'd nearly outgrown. They sang along to old rock songs in the truck on the way to school. Eli drummed the dashboard like a miniature drummer with big dreams. After dropping him off, Tom planned to head to the gas station and spend his last $10, half on fuel, half on coffee, if he stretched it right. Maybe someone would call about the plumbing job he'd posted in the grocery store window. Maybe not, but he never made it to the gas station. At 8:12 a.m., just as he turned off the main road toward his trailer, he saw something strange. A black car parked out front. Shiny, spotless, out of place among the gravel and patchy weeds. The kind of car you only saw in movies or in town during elections, when important people came through for 5 minutes and waved like they cared. Tom slowed to a stop, heart thumping. He didn't owe anyone money, not enough for that kind of car to show up. He killed the engine and stepped out cautiously. A man in a grey suit stood near the car, his coat buttoned, shoes too clean for rural roads. He turned as Tom approached, then nodded. "Mr. Carter?" Tom stiffened. "Yeah." The man smiled politely, in that polished way that made Tom feel like he was about to be offered a timeshare or audited. "I have a message for you," the man said, reaching into his coat and pulling out a small white envelope. "And a ride if you're willing to come," Tom frowned. "A ride?" The man motioned behind him, toward the sky above the tree line. In the distance, the faint, unmistakable outline of a private jet circled low. It shimmered against the morning light like a bird out of place. Tom blinked, shook his head once. "I think you've got the wrong guy." "I don't believe I do, sir," the man replied calmly. "The message will explain." Tom stared at the envelope. It had no markings on the front, just his name, again, written in the same precise blue. Inca, his fingers felt numb as he opened it. "Tom, I said thank you once, but I didn't tell you what that moment meant. You gave me shelter, not just from the rain, but from the noise inside my own head. I'd like to return the favor. If you're willing, I've arranged for you and Eli to fly out today, just for a few days. Nothing more than rest and space to breathe. No expectations, no press, no debt, just an open door." Vivian. Vivian. The name hit him like a wave. He remembered now. Vivian Hart. The woman from magazines he'd glanced at while waiting in line. The one with the tech empire and the charity foundation and the impossible life. She'd been Anna in his truck, and now she was sending a jet for him. The man in the suit waited patiently. "Who are you?" Tom finally asked. "I'm just the driver, sir. But I'm instructed to bring you to the airfield if you agree." Tom looked down at the letter again. It didn't feel like a trick. It didn't even feel real. "What about my son?" "We can swing by his school. Ms. Hart, has already made arrangements with the district. He'll be excused for the week. We have a travel bag ready for both of you." Tom hesitated. Every instinct told him this was too much, too fast, too not his life. But then he thought of Eli, of the way the boy looked up at the stars some nights and whispered, "Do you think Mom can see us?" Of how hard he'd tried to keep everything together, and how close he'd come to falling apart, and of the woman in the rain, sitting silently in his passenger seat, sipping terrible coffee and saying thank you not just with words, but with the kind of honesty Tom hadn't seen in years. He folded the letter carefully, slid it into his coat pocket. "All right," he said slowly. "Let's go get my son." By 9:45 a.m., they stood on the tarmac. Eli's eyes were as wide as saucers as the jet door lowered, stares unfolding like something out of a dream. A soft wind stirred the hair at Tom's temples as they climbed together. Inside, it was quiet and clean, the kind of luxury that didn't need to shout. A flight attendant greeted them with hot cocoa for Eli and black coffee for Tom, no questions asked. And at the very front of the cabin, seated by a wide window with a book in her lap, was Vivian. She stood when she saw them, offering that same small, tired smile from days before. No spotlight, no makeup, no armor. Just the woman who'd needed a place to breathe and found it somehow, in an old truck with peeling seats and a quiet man who gave what little he had. "Hi, Tom," she said softly. "Hi," he said back. And then he sat down across from her, not knowing what this was, only that it mattered. Somewhere in the clouds above, a new chapter began. The jet hummed like a soft lullaby as it cut through the sky, steady and untouchable. Tom sat stiffly in a leather seat that probably cost more than his truck, staring out the oval window at the endless blue beyond. Every part of this felt borrowed. Nadi, like putting on someone else's life and hoping no one noticed it didn't quite fit. Across from him, Eli had long since surrendered to the plush recliner. His little boots were off, legs curled under him, a half-empty cup of cocoa resting beside a coloring book the flight attendant had produced as if by magic. Tom let himself watch him for a moment. His son looked peaceful, carefree, as if this wasn't the strangest day of their lives. He turned when he felt eyes on him. Vivian, no longer Anna, no longer the quiet stranger in the rain, was seated near the front of the cabin, angled slightly toward him. She was dressed simply, jeans, a soft blue sweater, and no makeup. Nothing about her screamed billionaire, and yet everything about her radiated control, except her eyes. Her eyes looked tired. Tired in the way Tom understood. "Can I sit with you?" she asked gently. Tom nodded. "It's your plane." She smiled faintly, then took the seat opposite him, folding her hands in her lap. For a few beats, neither of them spoke. Then Vivian said, "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "I wasn't sure either." That made her laugh, soft, genuine, a little sad. Tom cleared his throat. "I got your note, the second one." Vivian nodded. "I hoped you would." There were 100 questions he could have asked. About why, about what this was, about what came next, but the one that slipped out surprised even him. "Why me?" Vivian looked down for a long moment, then out the window as if gathering her words from the sky. "Because I've met a lot of people who say the right things," she said slowly. "People who give when it's convenient, smile when someone's watching. But that day in the truck, you didn't ask anything. You didn't try to guess who I was. You didn't look at me like I was broken or interesting or valuable. You just offered shelter." Tom shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with praise. "I had a charger," he mumbled. Vivian smiled. "It wasn't the charger. It was the silence. You let me sit in it. Most people can't stand silence, especially when something's hurting." He looked at her then, truly looked at her. The tiredness in her expression wasn't just from work or wealth or fame. It was grief, worn in, familiar grief, the kind that never really leaves. It just stops announcing itself. Tom knew that grief. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Car accident." Vivian's face didn't flinch. "My son, 10 years ago, a virus, fast, mean. He was 7. Their eyes met, not in pity, not in comparison, but in recognition. Tom exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry. So am I." Outside, the clouds thinned, revealing slivers of land below, mountains and forests, untouched and vast. Vivian shifted slightly in her seat. "I didn't bring you here for a favor, Tom, or to fix anything. I just wanted you and Eli to have a few days where you didn't have to fight so hard, a few days where someone else holds the weight." Tom was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm not used to people doing that." "I wasn't either," she admitted. "They sat like that for a while. No need to fill the space." Eventually Eli stirred, stretching like a cat, then looking around in wide-eyed wonder. "Are we there yet?" Vivian smiled warmly. "Almost, sweetheart." Tom reached over and squeezed his son's hand. Outside the window, the jet began to descend. Below them, nestled between a wide lake and a forest of whispering pines, was a sprawling house. Not a mansion in the vulgar gold and glitter way, but a place that looked like it belonged. Stone and wood, chimneys curling smoke into the sky, and silence all around. "What is this place?" Tom asked. "A retreat," Vivian replied. "Not just mine. I built it years ago before I stopped pretending I was okay. I come here when I need to breathe." The plane touched down with barely a shudder. As they stepped out onto the private airstrip, the air was different. Crisper, cleaner, like the kind of air no one had yelled into for a long, long time. A black SUV waited quietly. At the edge of the runway, no paparazzi, no press, just a single driver in a wool coat, nodding politely. Eli clung to Tom's hand as they approached the car. "Dad, is this real?" Tom looked at his son. "I think so." And then, in the soft stillness of that pine-framed driveway, with wind, in the trees and winter in the air, Tom Carter felt something he hadn't felt in years. Safe. The cabin was not what Tom expected. When someone says private retreat, you picture marble floors, towering ceilings, staff bustling like bees. But this was something else entirely. The house sat humbly among the trees, as if it had grown from the ground rather than been built atop it. Made of stone and timber, with tall windows facing the lake, it gave off a warmth that didn't come from opulence but intention. There were no grand chandeliers, no gold-plated anything, just woven rugs, shelves lined with old books, a fireplace, the size of a barn door, and the scent of cedarwood and cinnamon clinging to every beam. Vivian led them through the entry hall with quiet ease. "I designed it myself." Well, designed might be generous. "I gave someone a feeling and asked them to build that." Tom chuckled, glancing around. "You gave them a good feeling." Eli tugged his hand. "Can we live here?" Vivian smiled over her shoulder. "You can stay as long as you like." That sentence lingered in the air, tender and generous. Tom opened, his mouth to object, to insist they'd only stay a few days, that they didn't belong here. But something in Vivian's tone silenced him. This wasn't a power play, it was human. They were shown to 2 guest rooms upstairs, one for Tom, one for Eli. Vivian's was at the far end of the hall, marked only by a simple photo hung beside the door. A black and white picture of a boy, maybe 7 or 8, with a mop of dark curls and a smile so wide it looked like sunlight. Tom paused. Vivian noticed. His name was Noah. Tom nodded, not saying anything. He didn't have to. Some grief doesn't ask for words. It recognizes its reflection in someone else and offers silent kinship. They spent the afternoon by the fireplace. Vivian brewed tea. Eli built a castle out of wooden blocks. Tom sat in a high-backed chair with a worn book in his lap he didn't read a single page of. He watched the flames instead, the way they moved and crackled, the way they reminded him of things both warm and dangerous. Vivian sat across from him with a mug of peppermint tea, legs curled under her, completely at ease in her own space. "You built all this," Tom said after a while, gesturing to the room, to the silence around it. "But you live alone." "Mostly," she said. I have places in New York, San Francisco, but they're noise. This is the only place I remember how to breathe." Tom nodded slowly. "I didn't know breathing could be something you forget." Vivian looked at him, eyes steady. "Grief makes you forget a lot of things. How to eat, how to sleep, how to be touched without flinching." Tom's throat tightened. "Yeah. It's not always loud either," she went on, voice softer now. "Sometimes it's just dust on everything." He didn't know what to say to that. But Eli saved him. "Dad," the boy called from the rug, holding up his crooked castle. "Can she help us build the top?" Vivian smiled. "I'd be honored." And so she joined Eli on the floor, hands careful and unsure at first, then more confident as he showed her how to stack the pieces so the tower doesn't fall. Tom watched them from the chair, something stirring in his chest he hadn't felt in a long time. Not attraction, not quite, but trust. The kind that didn't come from knowing someone long, but from recognizing that they see you without needing to explain yourself. When the castle collapsed, because of course it did, Eli burst into laughter. Vivian laughed too, genuinely, and Tom joined them, and in that brief echo of joy the house didn't feel quiet. It felt alive. That night, Tom tucked Eli into the softest bed the boy had ever slept in. The room smelled like lavender, and the pillows were fluffed to absurd heights. "Dad," Eli said as he settled in. "Yeah? Is she nice?" Tom smiled. "Yeah, she is. Do you think Mom would have liked her?" Tom froze. It was a question without malice, just curiosity, but it landed like a weight on his chest. "I think," he said carefully, brushing hair from Eli's forehead, "your mom would have liked that she made you laugh." Eli grinned. "She built a whole tower with me." "She sure did." Tom kissed his forehead and turned off the lamp, then stood by the door for a long moment, just watching. Eli's breathing slowed into sleep. For the first time in months, there was no sound of cold wind seeping through cracks in the walls, no dripping faucet, no buzzing heater, just peace. He stepped out into the hallway and found Vivian standing near the staircase, sipping from a glass of wine. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "I do," he said. "I don't know what this is or why you picked me out of all the people in the world, but it means more than I can say." Vivian looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she said, "Can I tell you something strange?" "Sure." "That day in your truck, I was going to disappear." Tom blinked. "What do you mean?" "I don't mean forever," she said quickly. "Not like that. I just meant drop off the map. No phones, no people. I had a hotel booked in some remote part of Canada. I wasn't running away. I just didn't want to be seen anymore." Tom swallowed. "And then I sat in that old truck," she said, smiling at the memory. "And there you were. No questions, no expectations, just a charger and silence, and something in me cracked open, like maybe the world wasn't done with me yet." Tom didn't speak. He couldn't. Vivian took a slow sip, then looked up the stairs. "I think Eli reminded me of someone I lost," she whispered. "But you reminded me of someone I hadn't met yet." The words landed softly, gently, and Tom understood. He didn't know what tomorrow would look like. He didn't know how long this would last, but standing in that hallway, with a sleeping child upstairs and a quiet woman beside him who had also stared down the dark and lived to tell the tale, he felt, for the first time in years, like maybe he wasn't walking alone anymore, and that was enough for tonight. The sun crept in slowly, filtering through tall pines and casting long golden streaks across the wooden floors of the cabin. For the first time in what felt like forever, Tom woke not to an alarm, or the rattle of the old trailer roof in a storm, or Eli tugging at his arm needing breakfast, but to stillness, A fire somewhere in the house had been kept alive through the night, and the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with something sweeter. Cinnamon, maybe. Warmth filled the room like a soft blanket, not just from the heated walls, but from the knowledge that there was nothing to chase this morning. No time card waiting, no landlord banging, no calls from utility companies. Just morning. Tom sat, up slowly in the guest bed, the sheets smooth and tucked the way his mother used to do when he was a boy. His first instinct was to check on Eli. He padded down the hallway barefoot, pausing in the open doorway. Eli was still asleep, curled on. His side, arms around a stuffed bear Tom hadn't seen in years. It must have come from the closet. Vivian had thought of everything. A soft rustle from the window caught Tom's eye. A wind chime swaying gently on the porch, catching sunlight like glass notes. He stood there for a long time, just watching. His son's sleep, safe and warm and far from everything they had carried on their backs for too long. Downstairs, he found Vivian in the kitchen. She was barefoot, wearing a grey cardigan over a simple tank top and pajama pants, her hair loosely tied. Back, she was flipping pancakes on a cast-iron skillet, humming under her breath, a slow, tuneless melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep. "You cook too," Tom said, leaning against the doorway. Vivian turned, surprised but smiling. "Only on days I want to remember what normal feels like." Tom nodded slowly. "Well, it smells better than normal to me." She laughed. "Coffee's already on. Mugs are by the stove." He poured a cup, the smell alone waking something in his chest. They moved around the kitchen in a quiet rhythm. Strangers still, in some ways, but with a kind of gentle awareness of each other. Like two dancers who'd never rehearsed, but somehow kept finding the same beat. Eli padded in a few minutes later, his hair sticking up in all directions. "Pancakes?" he asked, his voice still heavy with sleep. Vivian placed a stack in front. "Of him, perfectly golden. With blueberries, hope that's okay." Eli blinked in disbelief. "This is the best place ever." They ate at the long wooden table by the window, watching light skim across the lake outside. Ducks drifted lazily across the water, and a fox appeared briefly at the edge of the trees, pausing, as if to greet the day before slipping back into. The brush. Tom hadn't felt peace like this in years. Over breakfast, Vivian asked Eli about his favorite superheroes, his school, what he wanted to be when he grew up. Eli answered with gusto. A firefighter, a drummer, a dinosaur wrangler, all in the same sentence. She listened attentively, not like someone trying to be polite, but like she cared. When Eli finished his third pancake, he looked up at her and said, "You laugh like my mom used to." The air shifted. Vivian's smile faltered, just a moment. She reached out and touched his hand gently. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." Tom met her eyes. No words passed between them, but something quiet and binding did. After breakfast, they went for a walk through the woods behind the house. The trail was soft with pine needles and the smell of moss and old earth. Eli skipped ahead, pointing out squirrel tracks and odd-shaped leaves. Vivian walked beside Tom, hands in her pockets. "I forgot what it was like," Tom said after a while, "to not feel like everything is about to break." "I used to live in that feeling," she said, "even when everything looked perfect." He looked at her. "Was it?" Vivian shook her head. "No, it just looked that way in the papers. Behind closed doors, it was quiet, but not the good kind. The kind that grows teeth." Tom knew that silence too. She went on, voice lower. "When Noah died, I stopped believing in things, in people, in mornings. I didn't disappear all at once. It was slow, 1,000 little withdrawals. But you still built this place." She nodded. "I needed somewhere to fall apart safely, somewhere that wasn't a hospital room or a boardroom or an awards stage." Tom glanced around. "You made it more than safe. You made it healing." Vivian looked at him then. Really looked. and said, "Maybe that's what you gave me too, Tom, in your truck." For a moment, I wasn't someone with a broken past or a public name. I was just a woman with a dead phone and a tired heart. Tom stopped walking. The forest held its breath. He wanted to say something, to reflect that vulnerability back, in kind, but before he could, a sudden shout broke the stillness. "Dad, come see this!" Eli was crouched near a fallen log, pointing at a mushroom shaped like a tiny umbrella. Tom and Vivian hurried over. Eli was already launching into theories about fairy villages and magical forest kingdoms. Vivian bent down beside him. "You think the fairies come out at night?" "Obviously," Eli said with an expert nod. Tom chuckled and ruffled his son's hair. As they made their way back toward the cabin, Tom felt something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Not just gratitude or relief or even peace. It was possibility. Not because someone rich had shown up with keys to another world, but because, in the most unexpected of places, two people who'd forgotten how to breathe found themselves inhaling again, slowly, gently, together. And maybe, just maybe, healing didn't always come in the form of grand gestures or sudden epiphanies. Sometimes it came like this: a quiet morning, a stack of pancakes, a walk in the woods, and someone willing to walk beside you. The wind had shifted, not outside. There, the pines still swayed with slow grace, and the lake shimmered in its usual calm. But inside Tom, something was stirring. Not loud, not dramatic, just different, like a door had been left open in a long-abandoned room, letting in light that hadn't touched those walls in years. It began with a question. They were seated on the wraparound porch that evening, just as the sun began its descent beyond the hills. Eli was in the living room, building another impossibly high tower out of wooden blocks, while a gentle instrumental song played in the background. The air was cool, the kind of cool that made you feel alive without making you uncomfortable. Vivian sat beside Tom on a wicker love seat, a blanket over her lap, her fingers loosely curled around a cup of tea. Her eyes followed the last orange streaks across the sky. She hadn't said much all afternoon, but it wasn't the kind of silence that came from withdrawal. It was the kind that invited truth. And then, softly, she asked, "What would you do if nothing was holding you back?" Tom didn't answer right away. No one had asked him that in years, maybe ever. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the way the shadows shifted on the porch planks. "I used to have an answer to that," he said finally. "Back when I still thought the future listened to people like me." Vivian didn't rush him. She just waited. "I always dreamed of opening a garage," he continued. "Not the kind that gouges people or charges you for windshield fluid. The kind where folks could come in without shame, where guys like me, single dads, veterans, folks starting over, could learn a trade, fix their cars, maybe even their lives a little." Vivian turned toward him, her eyes soft. "That's not just a dream, that's a mission." Tom huffed a quiet laugh. "Yeah, well, missions don't keep the lights on when you've got $15 to your name and a kid who needs shoes." She nodded slowly, not with pity, but understanding. "I lost count of the things I put on hold after Noah died," she said. "I cancelled 3 major ventures, ended 2 foundations. I thought I was protecting myself from disappointment, but really, I was just afraid of building something in a world where he no longer existed." Tom looked over at her, his brow furrowed. "You seem so put together." She smiled, a little, sadly. "I'm not. I've just had more practice pretending." They sat quietly as night crept in. The porch lights flickered on with a soft hum. Crickets began to sing from somewhere in the brush. Tom leaned back against the cushion and exhaled. "Sometimes I think I'm still stuck in the moment I got the call about Emily, like part of me never left that spot on the kitchen floor." Vivian didn't look away. Grief freezes time, she said, but kindness is what thaws it. He turned toward her, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. She wasn't saying it like someone who had read it in a book. She was saying it like someone who'd lived every syllable, and for the first time since arriving, Tom allowed himself to ask something he hadn't dared. Why me, Vivian? Why not donate to some cause? Why this? Why us? She didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands in her lap, glanced out toward the lake, then said, "Because you didn't ask what I could give. You just gave what you had, a place to sit, a moment of silence, half a cup of gas station coffee, no strings, no motives. I'm surrounded by people who want something. That day I needed someone who didn't." Tom swallowed hard. Her words reached into a part of him he didn't even know was still alive. "I wasn't trying to be noble," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why it mattered." Inside the cabin, the sound of crashing blocks signaled the inevitable. Toppling of Eli's tower. His laughter followed seconds later, bright and unburdened. Tom grinned, but then his face sobered. "I want to give him something more," he said quietly. "Not money, not even stability, just proof that the world can still be kind." "You already have," Vivian said. He looked at her, uncertain. "By being you," she added. And with those words, something inside Tom settled. Not because the future was suddenly secure, or because he had all the answers, but because, for the first time in a long time, he realized he didn't have to carry every question alone. Vivian stood then, gently stretching her legs. "I have an idea," she said, her voice laced with that spark he had come to recognize. "Tomorrow morning, there's someone I want you to meet." Tom raised a brow. "Should I be nervous?" "Only if you hate good coffee and a lot of honest conversation," he chuckled. "I've had worse mornings." She paused at the door. "You ever think about starting that garage again? Not just as a dream, but as a plan?" Tom looked past her toward the lake where the stars were just beginning to prick the surface of the water. "Lately?" he said. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot." Vivian nodded. "Good, because the world could use a few more places built on second chances." With that, she disappeared into the house, leaving the screen door creaking gently behind. Tom remained on the porch a while longer, the weight in his chest feeling a little lighter. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he was ready to dream again, but he was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, dreams could come find him, and this time he wouldn't turn them away. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the cabin in broad golden strokes. The lake outside shimmered like glass, undisturbed and wide. It was the kind of morning Tom Carter used to dream about during long, sleepless nights. Back in his trailer, quiet, gentle, and free from the ache of survival, he stood at the kitchen counter in his borrowed flannel pajamas, watching the coffee maker hiss and gurgle. Eli was still asleep upstairs, curled into a tangle of soft blankets, and for once, Tom didn't feel the urge to rush. There were no errands to run, no bills waiting in red envelopes, no stomach-deep anxiety about gas money. He poured a mug and turned when he heard footsteps. Vivian stepped into the kitchen, dressed in dark jeans and a soft cream sweater, her hair down, bare feet padding lightly on the hardwood. She looked relaxed, and yet there was a kind of purpose in her posture, a glint of something focused behind her easy smile. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he replied, handing her a mug. They drank in comfortable silence for a few moments before she said, "You still up for meeting someone today?" "You make it sound like a date," he said, half teasing. She gave him a wry look. "Depends on how charming you are with people who write checks." That made him pause. "Wait, who exactly am I meeting?" Vivian leaned against the counter, warming her hands around the mug. An old friend, name's Linda Chen. She's an architect now, mostly does community-centered projects, shelters, rehab centers, job training facilities. Years ago, she helped me design this place. Tom raised a brow. And, Vivian said, tilting her head, I might have mentioned a certain someone with a dream about a garage for struggling single dads. Tom set his coffee down, suddenly alert. Vivian, I didn't promise anything, she said, holding up her hand, but I told her about you, about your idea. She was interested. I figured, if there's even a chance, it's worth a conversation, right? He looked down, processing. The idea of telling a stranger about his half-formed vision was terrifying, but underneath that, something else stirred, a flicker of belief. Not from others, from himself. All right, he said finally. Let's talk. They met Linda Chen an hour later at a small cafe just outside the next town, rustic and cozy, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus. Linda was in her mid-50s, with short, silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She shook Tom's hand firmly, then gestured for them to sit. Vivian let Tom lead. She didn't interfere, didn't steer. She just watched with quiet pride as he began to explain. It wasn't polished. Tom stumbled a little. His voice wavered when he spoke about how isolating it was after Emily died. How many nights he'd fallen asleep in the truck cab with Eli, hurled beside him, wondering if there was anyone out there who understood what he was carrying. But as he went on, describing the garage he'd imagined for years, part repair shop, part training center, part safe haven, something shifted. His voice steadied, his eyes lit. He wasn't just telling a story, he was inviting them into it. Linda listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When he finally finished, she folded her hands on the table and said, "You ever run a business?" "No, ma'am," Tom said honestly. "Ever managed a team?" "Only at the food pantry back when I volunteered, but that was years ago." "Got a business plan?" "Not yet." Linda nodded slowly. "Good," Tom blinked. "Good?" She smiled. "Means we get to build it right from the start. I've worked with all kinds of people. Most of them walk in with a dozen assumptions. You're walking in with one thing that matters, a reason. That's rare." Tom exhaled, the tension easing. From his shoulders. "I don't have money," he said. "Just the idea." Vivian finally spoke. "That's where I come in." Linda leaned back in her chair. "We can find land. I know some folks in state planning who owe me favors. You give me 2 weeks, I'll come back with a rough design. Something small, expandable, scalable." Tom stared at her, stunned. "You're serious?" "I wouldn't be sitting here in a cold cafe at 9 in the morning if I wasn't." Linda said, "This isn't charity, Tom, it's legacy. You're not building a garage, you're building a lifeline." On the drive back to the cabin, Tom sat in silence, watching the trees blur past. His hands were still resting in his lap, but his thoughts moved fast, faster than they had in years. Vivian glanced at him. "You all right?" He looked over, his expression unreadable. Then he said softly, "I think I forgot how it feels to have someone believe in me." Her voice was warm. "You didn't need someone to believe for you, Tom. You just needed someone to remind you it was still possible." He nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Back at the cabin, Eli was waiting on the porch with a plate of cookies and a glass of milk. A bribe, no doubt, for letting him skip his reading lesson that day. Tom scooped him up and spun him once, laughing. "Dad, did you win?" Eli asked. Tom paused, smiling. "Not yet, but we're just getting started." That night, after Eli had gone to bed and the house had gone quiet again, Tom and Vivian sat by the fire with the blueprints of possibility laid out between them. Not on paper, but in words, in glances, in the warmth of two people who'd seen life at its hardest and were still standing. What they were building wasn't just a garage, it was a second chance. Not only for Tom, not only for Eli, but for anyone who had ever needed a place to begin again. It was raining on the morning of the grand opening, not the cruel, sideways kind of rain that made people curse the sky, but a gentle, steady drizzle that softened the edges of the day. It soaked into the soil, rolled off the roof of the newly built garage and gathered in small puddles along the curb. And still, people came. They came in work boots and flannel shirts, in hand-me-down jackets and hoodies too thin for the season. Some arrived alone, shoulders hunched against the weather. Others came with little ones clutching their fingers. Faces, curious but cautious. Tom Carter stood just inside the large open bay doors of Second Chance Garage, watching the first visitors drift in. The sign above the door was hand-painted. Eli had helped choose the colors, a deep navy with warm gold lettering, and the smell of fresh wood and engine grease filled the air like memory. He wore the only collared shirt he owned, sleeves rolled to the elbows, oil smudged into his knuckles from an early morning fix on the generator. He couldn't help it. Even today, especially today, he needed to keep his hands busy. Vivian stood nearby, a thermos of coffee in one hand, and that quiet confidence in her posture that always made him feel like things would be okay, even when he didn't yet believe it himself. She didn't hover, didn't grandstand. She just was, steady, present, real. Linda Chen had flown in for the day, bundled in a tan coat and rubber boots. She grinned as she moved from guest to guest, explaining the layout. 3 service bays, a classroom for certification training, a break room with donated toys and second-hand books, a back office with a corkboard covered in job leads and community notices. Everything done small, but done right. And just past noon, when the first awkward hum of gathering people had settled into something like momentum, Tom stepped onto the makeshift wooden platform they'd built from repurposed pallets. He cleared his throat, and the modest crowd turned to face him. Eli stood right up front, holding a cardboard sign that read in red crayon, "My dad fixes more than cars." Tom smiled, heart catching in his throat. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, voice rough with nerves. "I'm a mechanic, a dad, a guy who knows how to stretch $20 until payday." There were a few quiet laughs, nods of agreement, but "I also know what it feels like to have nowhere to go when everything breaks at once. Your car, your bank account, your heart. I know what it means to be alone in that." He paused, glancing at Vivian. She gave him the smallest nod. He went on. "This place isn't here to hand out miracles. We don't have those. What we have is space, tools, coffee that's mostly hot, and people who won't look at you like you failed just because you fell down." The room held its breath with him. "We're not fixing cars," he said. "We're fixing what happens when you think you've run out of chances." And with that, he stepped down. No applause was needed. The silence that followed felt fuller than any noise. Eli ran up and threw his arms around him. "You did it, Dad." Tom hugged him tight. "We did." By mid-afternoon, the garage was alive. One bay held a beat-up Corolla donated by a local dealership, with a father of 2 learning how to replace. The timing belt under the watchful eye of a retired mechanic named Barry. In another bay, 2 teens worked on a rusted-out truck, music playing from an old radio on the workbench. In the classroom, a woman in her early 30s sat beside her daughter, taking notes on brake systems. Vivian drifted through the space quietly, never introducing herself unless asked. She helped pour coffee, fetched extra gloves from the supply closet, chatted with a teenage mother about scholarship programs for vocational training. No one knew her net worth. No one needed to. Tom caught her wiping down a counter near the tool wall, and he walked over, grinning. "People are supposed to visit on opening day," he said, "not do inventory." Vivian shrugged. "I like the smell of WD-40 and purpose." He laughed. "That should be our slogan." She looked around the garage and then back at him. "This is good, Tom. Really good." He sobered. "It wouldn't exist without you." "It wouldn't exist without you," she corrected. "I didn't build this. You did. You made it real." Tom looked around. at the people talking, laughing, learning, and he felt the truth of that settle deep into his bones. Not pride, not ego, just peace. He'd planted something and it was growing. Eli ran by with a wrench in one hand and a cookie in the other. "Dad, Barry said I can help change a tire," Tom called after him. "Just don't eat that cookie." "While doing it," Vivian chuckled. "He's going to run this place someday." Tom looked at her. "If he wants it, it'll be his." They stood there for a moment, two people bound by loss but no longer defined by it. Then Vivian reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wasn't going to give you this today," she said, "but it feels right." He unfolded it slowly. It was a check, a large check. His eyes widened. "Vivian, I can't. You can. And you will," she said firmly. "Not for you, for them. To expand, to hire, to keep the lights on during the hard seasons." He looked at her, searching her face. "What's the catch?" "There's no catch," she said. "Just a request. Anything. Don't stop here. Don't let this be a good idea that lived once and faded. Build it, grow it, make it contagious." Tom folded the check back, up and slipped it into his pocket. "I will," she smiled. "I know." That evening, after the last guest had gone and the tools had been returned to their racks, Tom stood in the empty bay. Rain still dripped from the awning outside, rhythmic and soft. Eli had fallen asleep in Vivian's lap on the old couch in the break room, a wrench still clutched in one sticky hand. She sat stroking his hair, eyes half closed, her expression one of quiet contentment. Tom looked around the space, the concrete floor, the humming lights, the wall of donated tools, the sign above the door that read, "Second Chance Garage. Come as you are." He thought back to that day in the parking lot, to the rain on the windshield, to a stranger asking for a charger, and now here he was, not just alive, not just surviving, but home. Snow came early that year, just a dusting, enough to frost the edges of the pine branches and hush the earth beneath a veil of white. It fell soft and slow over the roof of Second Chance Garage, catching the porch light and glimmering like a benediction. Tom stood outside beneath that light, coffee in hand, breath rising in clouds as he watched the flurries gather. The garage was closed today, Sunday, a rest day, but the warmth still lingered from the week behind him. 5 days of engines humming, people learning, and laughter echoing through concrete halls. Inside, Eli was decorating the break-room Christmas tree with Barry, the retired mechanic who now volunteered 3 days a week. Vivian had brought in a box of ornaments from her own home, glass baubles, some hand-painted by Noah, his name still visible in faded red across one. She hadn't said anything when she handed the box to Eli. Just smiled. Tom turned as the screen door creaked open. Vivian stepped out, wrapping a thick scarf around her neck. Her cheeks were pink from the fire inside, her eyes bright in the crisp winter air. "I thought you might be out here," she said. Tom smiled. "Couldn't sleep. Too much coffee or too much thinking?" He shrugged. "Little of both." She joined him, standing close but not too close. They stood like that in silence for a while, watching the snow fall over the gravel lot, covering tire tracks and salt stains like grace covering history. "He's happy here," she said, glancing through the window toward Eli. Tom followed her gaze. His son was dancing with a candy cane in hand, trying to get Barry to hang a red ornament just a little higher. "Yeah," Tom said. "He really is." "And you?" Tom looked down into his mug, then out at the road. "I think I finally stopped waiting for life to go back to what it was," he said quietly. "It won't. It never does. But I think maybe this is better, not easier, but better." Vivian nodded slowly. "We spend so long trying to climb back into old versions of ourselves, but sometimes who we become after is someone we were. Meant to be all along?" He looked at her. "You speak like someone who's made peace with the past," she smiled faintly. "I haven't, not completely, but I've stopped trying to rewrite it." Tom hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper worn at the creases. He held it out to her. She unfolded it, eyes scanning the words. It was her note, the first one, left in his truck days before the world changed. Her breath caught in her throat. "You kept it," she whispered. "I almost didn't," Tom said. "I figured it was a moment that would pass, but something told me it mattered." Vivian looked up, blinking against the sting in her eyes. "It did. It does." He smiled gently. "That moment saved me." She folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "Funny," she said. "I thought you saved me." They stood like that. For a long time, no more words needed between them. Eventually, the break room door opened, and Eli burst out, bundled in a coat 2 sizes too big, cheeks red, eyes bright. "Dad!" he called. "Snowball fight before dinner?" Tom laughed. "You sure you're ready for this?" Eli grinned wickedly. "I was born ready." Vivian stepped back as father and son dove into the snowy yard, laughter bouncing off the garage walls. She watched them for a moment, then knelt in the snow, scooping a small snowball herself. "Are you joining us?" Tom called, surprised. Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Let's just say, I don't always play fair." Moments later, snow was flying. Laughter echoed across the lot. Tom's jacket was soaked. Eli's giggles rang out like bells. And for a few blessed minutes, the world was only snow and breath and joy. Later that night, after dinner, Eli fell asleep on the couch with a candy cane half melted in his hand and snow still clinging to the cuffs of his jeans. Tom covered him with a blanket and turned to find Vivian standing in the hallway, watching quietly. "He doesn't have nightmares here," she said softly. Tom nodded. "Neither do I." Vivian stepped into the room, picked up a framed photo from the table. It was one they'd taken last week. Tom and Eli in front of the garage, arms around each other, grinning. She ran her fingers over the glass. "Do you think," she asked, "that there's a version of life where Noah and Emily are proud of us right now?" Tom didn't hesitate. "I don't think we need a different version. I think they're already proud of where we are, of who we're becoming." Vivian looked at him, her expression open and unguarded. "Do you ever think maybe we were meant to find each other?" He met her eyes. "I don't think we found each other. I think kindness did." She smiled. "That might be the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me." He reached for her hand then, not with urgency, not with expectation, just a quiet offering. She took it, and in that small act, something deep inside both of them healed just a little more. Not everything was perfect. Life would still bring grief and work and long nights and uncertainty. But now there was also this, a garage with no locks, a kitchen with laughter, a child who believed in second chances, and 2 hearts, once shattered, beginning to beat in rhythm. Again. Outside, the snow kept falling, and in a small town where nothing big ever seemed to happen, something quietly miraculous had. All because a struggling single dad let a woman charge her phone, and she never forgot. Before you go, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Whether you're tuning in from a quiet town like Tom's, a busy city, or somewhere in between, your presence here means the world. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who might need a gentle reminder that kindness still exists. We share true-to-life, heartwarming stories every week, and your support helps keep these stories alive. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep believing in second chances.